My third guest, and a person who I have grown a great amount of respect and admiration for, is Dr. Ken Finn. And one of the reasons I say that is Dr. Ken Finn is one of the few physicians, one of the very few physicians who is actually willing to speak out publicly about marijuana. Dr. Finn has specialized in pain medicine for 25 years. He is a renowned author, and his book is getting national acclaim. In my last newsletter, I listed the link if you'd like to order it. He'll probably tell you more about it. Dr. Finn is nationally recognized regarding his understanding of the many medical impacts of marijuana. Dr. Finn.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, let me pull up my slides here. What's going on here? Somebody controlling my screen here. Let me get out of that. All right, let me just. All right, does that work?
Sure does.
Yes.
All right, so I'll try to keep this as brief as I can because I can speak for hours on this issue. I've been practicing in Colorado Springs for over 25 years. I'm a pain medicine specialist, board certified in rehab medicine, pain management. I am the president-elect of the American Board of Pain Medicine. I've been on their exam council for 20 years. I write the test questions for providers that want to take care of patients in pain. I served on the governor's task force for Amendment 64 on the Consumer Safety and Social Issues Work Group. I spent 4 years on our Medical Marijuana Scientific Advisory Council through CDPHE. I testified to the Canadian Senate on their marijuana bill a couple of years ago. I was invited to British Parliament this past June, but that was canceled due to COVID. But they've reached out to me again, and hopefully next June, end of June, early July, I'll be back in London speaking to Parliament on this issue. The impetus for the book I edited, because I did not author any of it, was the fact that as a pain physician, I was seeing patients come to my practice on huge doses of narcotics, which was a problem. They were reporting very high levels of pain and were using marijuana for their pain. So it didn't make any clinical sense. So based on my anecdotal experience, I said, well, this doesn't make any clinical sense, or there's no evidence. So I educated myself. And that was the impetus for this book that I edited, because most providers don't know the science behind, what impacts it may have on the body. And so I had over 70 authors from 3 countries, 20 chapters, covering everything from driving impairment to the use in pain, the basic science, et cetera. I've actually gotten a very good book review on Midwest Book Reviews at Ramey. I'll send to you and you can share. I have a Mayo Clinic psychiatrist gave a very good book review as well. So unfortunately, this was not a career choice, and I know more than most, and I'll try to keep this brief. These are kind of the talking points, although there's many, many more that we can speak to. This graph comes from CDPHE, and you have to keep in mind that we have had medical marijuana since 2001, when we voted on it in 2000 with Amendment 20. More than 90% of the medical marijuana cards were recommended for pain. So if marijuana was that good for pain, the graph should not look like this. And as you can see, just between 2018 and 2019 alone, we've had a 24% increase in prescription opioid overdose deaths and a 115% increase in fentanyl-related deaths. We don't have an opioid problem, we have a drug problem in our country. They all play very well together in the sandbox. We're having issues with methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, opioids, prescription, non-prescription opioids, et cetera. So if anybody can point to me on this graph where marijuana has had any impact on our opioid epidemic, I would like for them to point it out to me or ask me a question or show me where it's been helpful, because I can't see it. And having presented this graph for the past 10 years, nobody has ever been able to tell me where the use of marijuana for pain has had any impact on Colorado's opioid or drug problem. So currently there's zero evidence that supports the use of dispensary cannabis for chronic non-cancer pain. And there's no medical evidence to substitute opioids with marijuana. People that use marijuana are more likely to develop opioid use disorder or misuse their opioids. That was based on a nice article from a couple of years ago. Olafson published a very large study. They initially identified 45,000 marijuana users and followed up with 34,000 marijuana users, and found that, and this is based on early 2000s product, where potencies were much lower. And despite lower potencies, marijuana users in the early 2000s, 3 years later, were more likely to have an opioid use disorder or demonstrate misuse of their opioids. There's been a lot of debate over whether or not medical marijuana has an impact on opioid deaths, and you can refer back to my graph. That doesn't seem to be the case in Colorado. A recent study last year from Stanford by Chelsea Shover and Keith Humphreys showed that actually states with medical marijuana programs have about 23% higher incidence of opioid overdose deaths compared to non-medical marijuana states. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about commercialization in youth. This is an important slide, and you have to understand that marijuana is the most prevalent substance found in completed teen suicide in the state of Colorado. I'll repeat that again. Marijuana is the most prevalent substance found in completed teen suicide in Colorado. It's interesting because it used to be alcohol, and that trend reversed and coincided with legalization in 2012 and has remained number one since then. And actually the percentage has continued to increase over time. And if you look at the left side of this slide, mental health and marijuana presence in dead teenagers in Colorado seem to go hand in hand. I mean, thoughts of suicidal intent, previous suicide attempt, relationship problems, mental health problems, depressed mood, etc. That's the data that we're finding in our state. Unfortunately, a lot of other states don't even track this data, and I think that should be a talking point. I think Colorado is probably doing the best job at looking at this information. I mean, we recently had, suicide awareness. This is a problem, and this is the data. This is the graphic from CDPHE in terms of the presence of marijuana in all ages to rise, particularly after de facto legalization in 2009 and then full-blown legalization in 12, implemented in 14. Recent article just last month, individuals, this came from JAMA Psychiatry, individuals with depression are at increasing risk of cannabis use disorder, especially daily or near daily cannabis use. People that have depression had double the odds of using cannabis compared to people without depression. So the correlation between the two is very, very strong. And it's almost a chicken and egg argument. Are they using cannabis because they're depressed? Are they depressed because they're using cannabis? Or is it a little bit of both? I don't know. And I don't have an answer for that. But the correlation and the link and the association between the two continues to get stronger with more research coming out. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine, looking at the Healthy Kids Survey from 2017. We lead the nation in adolescent vaping use. And the Healthy Kids Survey from 2 years ago showed that kids that used electronic vapor devices used marijuana in the past 30 days more than binge drinking in the past 30 days, a significant percentage difference. And actually the use of marijuana in the past 30 days was the number one reported symptom in kids that were using vaping devices. So they don't just vape nicotine, they vape all sorts of stuff, especially marijuana. Just last month, Minnesota, I mean, we were in the middle of a vaping epidemic before we were hit with COVID. And I don't know if you remember, a lot of people tend to forget these things, where the vaping epidemic, THC and vitamin E acetate had center stage. 85% of the deaths related to vaping had either vitamin E acetate or marijuana. And just last month, Minnesota had an alert over 11 cases during the COVID pandemic of vaping EVALI cases, all of them were reporting vaping, most involving THC. So their health department actually issued a warning, and this is during our COVID pandemic, that EVALI is still alive and well, and the vaping pandemic or vaping epidemic continues to persist through COVID. So here we go to the Healthy Kids survey. I don't know if any of the prior speakers had brought this up or not, but the Healthy Kids survey, which is done every 2 years, was just released in 2020. The New England Journal of Medicine was the 2017 data. The 2019 data was just released last month. So 34% of kids that admitted to using marijuana drove a vehicle after using marijuana in the past month, which is a significant increase from the 2017 data where only 9% admitted to driving after using marijuana. More than half of the kids that were using marijuana report, and if you don't know what dabbing is, that's the use of very high potency THC products, the dabs, the shatters, the waxes, using a blowtorch to heat it. So 69% increase in kids vaping marijuana in just 2 years. Our kids are in trouble. More than 20% of these kids that have used in the past 30 days got it from an adult. So this is the most recent data from the state of Colorado, when previously our state health department said our kids are fine, that the use is stabilized, it's or going down. However, there are other effects that are very concerning from a public health and safety perspective, with stoned kids driving around, using high potency products. And I think, I can't remember who it was that mentioned that, we're basically in uncharted waters. We really don't know what the long-term effects of these high potency products are going to be on the human brain, or in utero exposures and that sort of stuff. I think this should be very telling and should be a sentinel sign that high potency products are not the way to go. I think we should limit potency, period, if we're going to continue this. And I wouldn't even call it an experiment, because when you run an experiment, you really care about the outcome rather than just the money. To take it even further, the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey was also released about 2 or 3 days after the Healthy Kids Colorado survey came out. The interesting thing is, having ever used marijuana was the #1 risk factor to misusing prescription opioids in the past month. And these are adolescents. You're talking about kids. So the Youth Risk Behavior Survey showed that the #1 risk factor of prescription opioid misuse is ever using marijuana. So you can argue gateway theory to, the cows come home. People tend to argue with me on that all the time. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Alcohol is a gateway drug. Tobacco is a gateway drug. We have a lot of gateway drugs that we did a terrible job with, and we're not doing a good job with marijuana either. Over 20% of high schoolers that report marijuana use, they frequently use alcohol, marijuana, and the ones that are abusing prescription opioids also reported current use of marijuana. So these, speaking on this issue for over a decade, I really have come to the conclusion that marijuana is the covert and insidious overseer of our drug epidemic. We don't have an opioid epidemic, we have a drug problem, and marijuana is the quiet substance on the sideline that's watching it all happen, but is probably one of the biggest contributors to our drug epidemic in my mind. Kids that see marijuana advertising are more likely to use marijuana. That's based on a RAND study from a couple years ago. Past month use in legal states is 40% higher than in non-legal states. I mean, the data is very, very clear. The more kids have access, the more they see advertising, the more likely they are to use. First-time use in legal states is 30% higher than in non-legal states. There was a nice article from Sam Wang from Children's Hospital in Denver. He's looking at teen visits to emergency departments going back between 2005 and just after legalization in 2014. The number of teen visits to the emergency department increased post-legalization by 71%. Were for psychiatric events. Again, both sides of the fence are going to say, oh, we don't want our kids to use, which I think is is not completely true, because they want to target youth and want lifelong customers, just like big tobacco did back in the day. And I'm old enough to know that and remember that. But tobacco doesn't really cause, depression, anxiety, suicidality, or driving impairment. But marijuana does. So we have our kids that are using, they're vaping and utilizing, dabbing high potency products. They're getting behind the wheel of a car. Our roads are more dangerous, and they're having mental health issues. And again, per one of my earlier slides, it's the number one substance found when kids kill themselves in the state of Colorado. Why is that? Here's just a picture that I took in Manitou Springs at one of the dispensaries. You can see that there was a woman there with a toddler waiting to get her marijuana. What kind of message is she sending to her youth, her kid? It's not a good one in my mind. Why can't kids have the opportunity of growing up in a drug-free household, in a safe household? I don't know. A little bit about public health and crime. Commercialization increases public safety risk and crime. Why did the city of Greeley launch a marijuana is not harmless campaign last year? Nobody's been able to answer that to me. I haven't been able to get a hold of anybody on council in Greeley, but they launched a campaign last year. We have police activity has gone up. We had down here in Colorado Springs, money laundering scheme tied to El Chapo. Burglaries at dispensaries in Denver hit a 3-year high in 2019. Denver homicides, the highest number in 14 years was in 2018. And I don't have access to, not been able to track down the 2019 data, but I can tell you, if you watch the news, you hear about this a lot more often. In 2018, Denver had the most officer-involved shootings. Colorado Springs had the second most officer-involved shootings. Several of them in both cities were fatal. This was just last month in Portland. It's not just a Colorado issue. Last month, there was a robbery spree during all the protests. Police are stretched thin. They're using rocks to shatter glass, windows, destroying property, grabbing product. 22 area dispensaries confirmed break-ins since late May during the pandemic. Many of the stores were hit several times. It was about, on average, 1 break-in every other night. Even their Liquor Control Commission said the number was probably even higher, with 60 stores lost product over the past 3 months. So it's interesting that this type of crime is targeting one kind of business. So our men and women in blue are really taking a hit, so to speak, as it relates to marijuana expansion programs, drug cartel activity, et cetera. Just a couple days ago, 7 people dead in California at a suspected illegal marijuana operation. 1,000 pounds of marijuana, several hundred plants at the scene. And if you look at the state of Texas, which is probably a good representation of the country, it's about 10% of the entire country live in the state of Texas. And if you look at a child abuse or neglect fatality, by what substance the perpetrator was using, you can see that marijuana, active use or even past use, is number 1, followed by no substance present. And if people are like, well, it's all the other drugs that are causing these fatality cases in children. Alcohol, cocaine, meth, heroin, even opiates are very, very low as it relates to the presence of a substance in the entire state of Texas when there's a dead kid from abuse or neglect. I mean, this slide should speak volumes in my mind. And these products aren't, they're insidious. Here you have a Charlotte's Web product. Charlotte Fiji was the young girl who moved to Colorado to get treatment with CBD or hemp for her seizures. And I actually know Charlotte's stepfather. Charlotte unfortunately passed away recently, but I know her stepfather through skiing and mountain biking. But here's a product sold in Evergreen, Colorado. There's no labeling. I mean, how much CBD is in here, how much THC is in here. And this bottle is about the size of a cap full of NyQuil. So it's 30 cc's. So that's not a lot of volume. So what's in this product that's sold over the counter, even though it might be age restricted to 21, and they're very expensive, apparently $170. But here's a certificate of analysis of this particular product. It has 84 milligrams of THC in that capful of NyQuil. 84 milligrams is a lot of THC. And where's the labeling? This is kind of another way that the industry can circumvent the state rules and regs. It has, 64 milligrams per one drop of in the bottle, but the total THC content in that small bottle is 84 milligrams, which is a lot of THC. Similar to the kids that are getting behind the wheel, CDOT did a nice survey of 11,000 anonymous marijuana users and non-users, and 70% have driven high within the past year. I mean, our roads are more dangerous. We were told that, hey, I don't care if you go home, and if you prefer to smoke a joint rather than have a beer or a glass of wine after work, nobody really cares or should care. But the theory that legalizing marijuana would reduce our alcohol consumption is not showing to be true in the state of Colorado. This comes from the Department of Revenue, the Colorado liquor excise tax. We've had 153 million gallons of alcohol consumed in 2018. And if you look at the graphic, that's continued to rise, particularly post legalization. So that it's, we're turning a bunch of alcoholics instead of just, giving up the alcohol and using marijuana. We have a lot of failures by the industry. If anybody has seen or read the Secretary of State of Oregon last year, their audit report shows that they cannot ensure that test results are reliable or products are safe. They were only able to do a compliance inspection for 3% of their stores in the state of Oregon that has a very robust medical and recreational program. They only inspected 1/3 of their growers for compliance as well. The last time Colorado audited its marijuana program was in 2009. They found a lot of problems with the medical marijuana program in the state. They made some changes back in 2009, but have never had a follow-up audit of their medical program and have never audited their recreational program. California has an 18% fail rate for unacceptable levels of things like bacteria, including E. coli, Salmonella, aspergillosis, pesticides, solvents, etc. Colorado does not test or recall contaminated products on a regular basis. The only public health department that will issue a recall is the Denver Public Health Department. And the only way you can get a recall notification is if you go to their website and find on their website where you can actually sign up for it, because it's not readily available, and you have to be a little tech savvy to get to the sign me up for email alerts on marijuana product. By the time you get the email alert, that product was more likely than not have been already consumed. So here's a great one from California a couple years ago. The lab in Sacramento was actually faking pesticide test results. Faking test results. This is the labs in California. Thousands of pounds of flour, equal amounts of other products like oils and vaping were under the recall. And so this Mark Foster had for 4 months was faking the results for 22 of the 66 pesticides he was required to review under the law to analyze. And out of the Journal of Toxicology, the people smoke pot from a bong actually ingest half of the pesticides that were used in the weed. I mean, these things are contaminated with things like a fungicide called mycobutanol. When you heat mycobutanol, that turns into hydrogen cyanide. That cannot be good for your body. As part of the governor's task force, we pushed for a limit to the amount of residual butane in BHO, or butane hash oil. We were steamrolled by the industry saying, no, there should be no limit to the residual butane in hash oil. And the last I checked, there still is no residual butane amount that's required. So your product that is created, God knows where, can have a significant amount of butane, which is, cigarette lighter fluid, in the product that you are heating and combusting and inhaling. So BHO products are not and are really poorly regulated. So is this really a cash cow? I mean, Colorado's made a lot of money over time, billion-dollar industry. The media loves to talk about how much money they're making, but I honestly do not feel that our state legislators can spell P&L or profit and loss. They talk about profit all the time. They never talk about the loss. So here's, for instance, here I'm going to pick on, I think it was 2018, where Colorado generated $266 million in revenue by calendar year. And on the right side is the total revenue over time. So it took 6 years to create $1 billion worth of sales and revenue. And but it's only 0.9% of our budget. Is that really a cash cow when you have 0.9% of the marijuana tax revenue is less than 1%? And all the other states that have created legal programs have fell flat on their face in terms of what they promised the voters. We're going to make a lot of money. We'll solve our budget woes. This is at the time, Colorado was 0.78%. Alaska was 0.12% of their budget. California promised $1 billion. They got 92% less than that. And the taxation in Colorado is very complicated. You have the BEST fund, the general fund, public school fund. Medical marijuana is less heavily taxed than the recreational product. And where the money goes, nobody really knows, but this is where it's supposed to go. And if you ask any school official in your community, how much money have you gotten from the industry, more likely than not, you're going to hear nothing. So let's look at the driving fatality data. Based on the NHTSA, or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration data, a driving fatality will cost about $1.4 million. You're talking about property, indemnity, life insurance, et cetera. So it doesn't matter if it's a drug impairment fatality or a fell asleep at the wheel, but a driving fatality, the loss, or the L, is about 1.4 million per fatality. And in 2018, where Colorado generated 266 million in revenue, we had 144 marijuana-related fatalities. So doing the math, that's about 201 million in the loss column in 2018. Adolescent use and addiction, I don't really have cost of that, but that is a cost. Law enforcement, the black market is alive and well. Even California pulled the National Guard from the border to battle the illegal marijuana markets. And if you look at environmental impacts, it's about $70 billion to clean up the state of California alone. And as a reference point, the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico was about $60 billion to clean up. For those from Colorado Springs or familiar with the Waldo Canyon fire, I was evacuated for a week. And this predates legalization in 2012. And when the fire was over, they found a 22-acre legal marijuana grow in the burn scar, complete with housing quarters, irrigation lines, et cetera. And in California, they're using banned pesticides. They're clear cutting trees. They're terracing. There's erosion issues. There's diversion of water in the millions and millions of gallons, where salmon no longer spawn because they divert the water out of the stream. The environmental impacts are going to tip the scales and make this probably the worst. It's going to outstrip alcohol and tobacco combined more likely than not. We have hospitalization rates going up related to marijuana. So we're really tapping an already taxed system, healthcare system, by more people going to the emergency department with cannabinoid hyperemesis, with mental health issues. The Centennial Institute in Denver published a paper in 2018 that reported for every dollar generated, it costs about $4.50 to regulate. I may not agree 100% with the $4.50, but I certainly do not feel it's zero, and I do not feel that it's a positive cash flow when you look at how much money is generated compared to how much it's going to cost. I actually published a paper in our local hospital, Penrose, between 2009 and 2014. One hospital in Colorado Springs out of the 4 lost $20 million related to marijuana-related emergency room visits. So hypothetically, in those 6 years, that's a $500 million healthcare ticket for the hospitals, on average $83 million a year. So if you go back to my number here, with the driving fatalities alone of 200, and you add the 80 million for the hospitals, you're already at $280 million in the loss column when Colorado generated 266. So you're already going negative just with those 2 data points. You throw in the environment, I can't give you a number for that. You look at law enforcement, the black market, what does that cost? I don't know. What are the other data for instance, the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome? In 2019, it's about $6,500 to work up one patient with cannabinoid hyperemesis. And if you will only allow one of those patients for each of the 25 emergency rooms in the state of Colorado, that's an additional $59 million healthcare ticket. And I can tell you, my colleagues here locally report that they see about 2 to 3 of those patients per doctor per shift. So that 59 million is probably underrepresenting what the actual cost is. I'm sorry for the duplication. So here's an assistant principal, almost lost his job after testing positive for THC. You know, he said, oh, I'm using a CBD product, and it was tested. And I see this all the time in my practice. Patients coming in, they're using some opioids for their chronic pain problem, and they say, well, I'm using a CBD product because I don't recommend co-administration of cannabinoids and opioids, cannabinoids and benzodiazepines or other centrally acting medications. And here you have a educator that was using a CBD product because that's what it said on the bottle, that had no THC labeling. So I'm going to keep it at that for now. This is my book that I edited. Again, 70 authors, 3 countries, 20 chapters that include basic science, things like cancer, psychiatry, neurology, cardiology, and actually the American Heart Association just came out with a paper last month. The lead author was Robert Page, who's a pharmacist from University of Colorado in Denver. He was one of my authors for the drug-drug interactions. But the American Heart has a position paper that came out last month showing evidence of heart attack, sudden death, arrhythmias, which can be fatal, cardiomyopathy. So even this national organization, the American Heart Association, recently put out a statement saying cannabis use is not good for your heart. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Finn. If you could please take your screen off or stop sharing your screen, please.
All right, I'm working on that.
Okay, thank you.
You got it.
We're going to go to questions. I just have a few things I want to quickly say. I did pull the data in Lakewood regarding suicides, and from 18 to 19, they went up 69%. We are going to have a link to these videos on my next newsletter. We're looking at the potential of getting this on YouTube. I will be asking all the presenters if they would like their contact information included in the newsletter, and then we will also do that. I'll tell you what, we'll go to questions. I know that Jim Otton wanted to say a few words, but it looks like he has stepped out for a second. We are being asked if we're going to post a succinct summary complete with statistics. We will have the links to these presentations on my newsletter for you to have in that form. I don't actually see any questions. I'm waiting for Jim to get back because I know he wanted to say a few words. Dr. Finn, you mentioned cannabinoid hyperemesis. Could you please describe that for folks that are not familiar with it?
Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is when you utilize a cannabis product and it makes you throw up to the point where you can't stop throwing up. There have actually been some case reports of people that have died from cannabinoid hyperemesis because of electrolyte imbalances and subsequent heart arrhythmias. But the things that you may or may not be aware of, but some of the pathognomonic symptoms that somebody might report are frequent bathing or frequent hot showers. The way that people throw up based on what my emergency department colleagues tell me. They describe it as scromiting or screaming and vomiting at the same time. You can almost, they say they can walk into an emergency department and tell, they can have 10 people throwing up, but they can tell which ones are cannabinoid hyperemesis. It's very, very specific. I've never seen it in my office, but it's very specific. But frequent hot showers is a symptom of cannabinoid hyperemesis, and then the frequent cyclic vomiting kind of comes along with that.
Okay. Jim, I noticed that you're back. Did you want to say a few words?
Yes, let me bring up something
And
here
then-
myself.
Okay, and then we'll go to questions, and I think Ms. Frieder will chime in
Okay.
after you speak.
Okay, let me share my screen if I can find it. Okay. Well, I'll just use it this way. Ballot question 2B is that's the number for the ballot question for the city of Lakewood. And my summary of that is basically it's unfettered growth for the addiction industry. It's you take a look at how that question was, how the ordinance and the revisions to the previous medical marijuana shop code as structured, and you just see that that's the conclusion you can come to. This is how the ballot question reads, and it shall the city of Lakewood adopt an ordinance adopting regulations governing the operation of retail marijuana stores and retail marijuana cultivation facilities of the Lakewood, city of Lakewood, and making corresponding amendments to certain sections and so on. You notice there's both an ordinance proposed and then amendments to the previous ordinance. This is the summary of the ordinance, of the ballot question that follows the ballot question itself when you open up your ballot. And look at the parts in red. And this is what the statement, again, this is what the voter will read. The ordinance would allow only the owners of those medical marijuana businesses that were licensed and operating in good standing in Lakewood as of April 1st, 2020, and so on to become retail stores. And then the ordinance would also make amendments to part of the code concerning size, location, and relocation limitations and hours of operation of medical marijuana businesses. There's a substantial falsehood in this last statement that we'll talk about here in a few moments. Whereas, and I'm just going to read this, I'm sorry about that. Whereas most existing medical marijuana stores in the city are small 1 or 2 door storefronts and strip malls, or a few modest standalone buildings with one street address, the proposed ordinance, again, this is the new information, expands the definition of a location to include separate street addresses and then some other descriptions to be considered as a business location. So this is what a storefront in a small strip mall, this is along West Jewel at the intersection of West Jewel and Union in Lakewood. And this is the, you can see to the right, that is the marijuana business. And there's 2 other stores that are in this image, and Google, if you wanted to know what those stores were, you can click on those symbols and know what those are. But this is the marijuana business, small storefront. It has a small grow operation in the back. This is a standalone. This is on West Alameda, just north of the Federal Center, south of the Federal Center post office. And this is the storefront up here, and then this is the grow operation in the back. Some of the neighbors in times past have complained about smells coming out of the grow operation, but these 2 items, these two shots are fairly typical of what we're seeing. Taking a look at the various portions of the ballot question and the summary, and then digging into what's actually said in the ordinance and the amendments, in a current valid marijuana medical marijuana license, that business can be relocated to a new location, either an existing building or a new build. In the existing medical marijuana code, size limits have been deleted from the existing. There's no limits stated for either the changes at a new location to a new location that may already exist, or a new build. And size limits in the new ordinance are not mentioned whatsoever. So you have a situation where you could get a small storefront becoming a very large operation at a new location, new build, and other issues. There appear to be 4 medical marijuana businesses with co-located cultivation operations presently. The requirement that a store cultivation operation be co-located to the same new location has been eliminated. So there's no statement that disallows additional cultivation facilities to be built beyond the 4 cultivation facilities that exist now, meaning that these roughly 11 stores, if they were to relocate and they were to add cultivation facilities, you could end up with 22 different features, the store themselves and cultivation facilities elsewhere. If we take a look at Denver as an example of what a cultivation facility might be, it can quite commonly be a very large warehouse which has immense grows inside those things. So that seems to be another issue. For any cultivation operation, the filtration system must control orders, and this is a statement that's in the new ordinance, to the extent practicable. Well, how is the city clerk or anyone in the city going to determine whether the operator has gone to the extent practical? And the one existing facility, standalone facility that we showed, that you missed the picture on, has had neighbor complaints of odors from it. I don't know if I've not checked with those folks recently to see if they're still complaining. But to the extent practicable, is the way it states. Closing hours are extended from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. A minor issue, but that means you're going to have you continue to have traffic in and out of those stores later into the evening. Although the city had a moratorium limiting the number of medical marijuana businesses since the start in 2009, the number of businesses has ranged from 11 to 22. The initial moratorium was, I can't remember, it was either 13 or 16, but the number ranged from 11 to 22. Apparently right now it's 11. A vote of the city council was apparently all that was required to allow more businesses. This suggests that a favorable city council could allow any number of retail businesses despite the statement in the new ordinance. And so there's roughly 7 different egregious examples of what can go on with these oh, sorry, I missed one. Persons with a criminal record can be named on the business application, but mitigating factors can be considered by the city, especially those factors between the last criminal conviction and a current application. And so there are basically 7 different issues that I see in the amendments to the existing code and then the new ordinance itself. And there are plenty of loopholes that would allow a tremendous amount of expansion of these businesses in the city, with perhaps as many as 22 different new facilities if every one of those businesses had the money to move their stores, relocate their stores, build larger stores, and perhaps also build cultivation facilities either adjacent to or in some other location. And to me, this whole the ordinance, this particular ballot question just is going to allow what I would consider unfettered growth for this addiction industry. Oh, forgot one thing. The current ordinance, its current code, requires that no one business be located more closely than about a little bit under 4,000 feet from any other similar business. The new ordinance allows 3,000 feet, and this also allows for greater density for these businesses. My feeling is that density will be taken care of. The only constraints that I see are constraints such as zoning, building codes being followed, and some of the other issues that are associated with the city doing the licensing. But my feeling is that this is a growth industry. We already know that it's an addiction industry, and those are some of my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I appreciate your summary of the ballot. Also, I looked at Ms. Frieder's question, and she asked if we would be providing a succinct summary with stats regarding all of the presenters. I will be providing a link to the videos, and I'm going to ask the presenters if they would like to have their information shared. I hope that answers your question, Ms. Frieder.
Well, not quite. What's going to happen is we're leaving these podcasts all fired up and ready to vote against marijuana, but we want our neighbors to, we want our community to,
Right.
and we can't just say, wow, marijuana is bad. We need, like I heard it's not giving us any money.
Just muted or something.
For every dollar that the state takes in, we're spending $14. It's things like that that are going to get people's attention.
Okay, Joe, did you want to respond to that, please?
I would really,
And I have a second question too, and that is, can we put the genie back in the bottle instead of fighting a defensive war?
Yeah.
I can answer the
Okay.
first one for sure.
Thank you, Ms. Frieder. Joe.
For your first question, Ramey, I would suggest that every attendee on the presentation get a copy of the Rocky Mountain Hider report, or at least, the very least, the link to the website where they can see the last consecutive year reports, because much of what we shared as far as those big talking points are in that Hider report in one way, shape, form, or another. It's a great summary, and there's always an executive summary page, and even just going the last 5 or 6 years of the executive summary page would give a snapshot as to, is it too late to put the genie back in the bottle? I think Matt would probably be a better one to answer that question, but we've changed how we can amend our state constitution since Amendment 64. So now we need a wider margin of residents to vote against it, to overturn it. But Matt, I don't know if you have a better answer than I do or Ken, but I feel that our residents need to understand the pain and suffering that we're experiencing to say we're done with this, it's over. And I think at this point they don't understand that.
Thank you. Matt, did you want to chime in on that?
You know, I like to be optimistic, and I think that it starts with this conversation right here, and it starts with being honest and truthful about what marijuana is and what it is not, and honest and truthful about the impact it's had on our communities. So it starts with this meeting. It starts with an open discussion with your friends, your neighbors, and your family members. It is true that it is much more difficult to amend the Constitution to unring the bell that was rung by Amendment 20 and Amendment 64. However, there's a lot of other things that we can do other than rolling back the amendments themselves. And it really begins with understanding the true impact in our communities first. We can work on a municipal level. We can also, we've made some strides in the legislature as well to try to curb home grows. So there's a lot of things that we can do to make sure that this issue doesn't get worse and worse for our kids and for our community.
Thank you. Joe, I actually have a question for you. You mentioned the marijuana grows and the odor. Can a person get high from just the odor of a grow facility or from secondhand smoke of marijuana?
You can get a contact high from secondhand smoked, like inhaled. However, that will not render a positive drug test unless it is such continuous unvented exposure over a long period of time that you really never get outside of that environment. So often we see small children who are in homes where the parents are using constantly, and they will test positive in hair and at high nanograms. So children can kind of experience that. But you know, if you are exposed to someone, like your neighbor is on their back porch smoking and it's blowing in your window or onto you as you sit on your back porch, you won't fail a drug test. But you know, it's very well known that you can get a contact buzz. That's true. And so what does it take to do that, and how much, and what is the exposure? That's really, really nebulous and hard to narrow down. But from just smelling it, no. Not that we know of. From smelling raw plant, it usually has to be the combustible form of it.
Yeah, that's a point strong to make. The form that the THC occurs in plants is TCHA, meaning acid, and in order for the THCA to be converted to a form of THC that has an effect, it has to be heated. You'll notice that every single marijuana product that for inhalation, ingestion, and whatever has been heated in some way. And so the form in the plant is TCHA. The form that's actually used is just plain TCH.
Thank you. When I look into the chat line, it looks like most of the comments, actually all of the comments, are people that would like to have the information that has been provided. And Joe, we will get up the Rocky Mountain Hider report on my next newsletter. I don't think there are any more questions. We are just a few minutes over time, and I want to respect the time of the guests. I really want to thank all of today's speakers. You've altered your schedules to be with me today. Actually, Dr. Finn is a practicing physician, very busy, and he had to change some patients in order to be here. Thank you, Dr. Finn. Matt, I know you're very busy. Thank you. And Joe, taking time from work, thank you. Diane, thank you for all that you've done with the Zoom platform. And Jim, I appreciate you bringing us up to speed on the 2A ballot initiative. I just have a few thoughts in closing that I would like to pass on to everybody. Oh, Dr. Finn, yes.
Just one comment, or two comments. Thank you for letting me talk. Second comment is, I don't care if you legalize or not, although I do care if you legalize, so I'm not a fan. Educate your voters before you put it on a ballot. Don't put it on a ballot 2 months before the vote. That's called a bait and switch.
The industry set it up that way.
Of course,
in 2014, we had about 5 or 6 months from mid-May to November to fight against it, and now we have 2 months.
Thank you, Dr. Finn, and thank you, Jim. Joe, did you have anything more to say?
No.
Matt?
I just want to say thanks again for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. And it was great to be on this panel with Joe and Dr. Finn. And I assure all the viewers, we did not collaborate before this presentation. And it's heartening to see so many similarities in our different disciplines. And I've learned a lot from each of your presentations today. And I agree with Dr. Finn that let's take a serious look at these issues moving forward. Let's move forward knowledgeably and intelligently, and so we can really make sure that we don't do more harm than good in this and many other issues. So again, thank you, Ramey and Diane Duffy, for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to be a part of it.
Thank you. Hopefully this seminar will be the beginning of needed dialogue and information to the public. And I just want to again emphasize that I brought you this seminar, this marijuana summit, if you will. It's provided by Ramey Johnson, not Counselor Johnson. I just have a few remarks in closing. I conceived of having a marijuana summit last January when it occurred to me that there had never been a forum about marijuana that gave honest, factual information with no political agenda.
Wait,
The in-
actually, we did have a conference in 2016 that I organized. I think Joe was there. I don't know if you spoke, Joe. But yeah, we had over 100 attendees. But again, the media was a miserable failure, did not promote it but it was very well attended. We had Dr. Murray from the Hudson Institute in DC was our keynote speaker. We had Rich Hildebrand. We had an addiction psychiatrist, emergency medicine. We had a lot of people. It was a lot of work to put on a conference, trust me. And I give kudos to anybody that wants to take that on.
Thank you. I was unaware. Was that here in Lakewood, Dr. Finn?
No, that was in Colorado Springs.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. You've been going at this for many years, actually. The information that has been provided in the last 2 days has been life-changing. Not only does marijuana have an economic, criminal, and health impact, for me, it is now an ethical, moral, and spiritual issue. We have heard it said, your body is your temple. However you vote, when you vote, please wrap your brains around the information that you've heard and base your vote on true information. Then I've done my job. Again, these seminars will be posted on my newsletter, and thank all of my presenters and thank those who've taken the time to join me. Thank you. Take care, folks. Stay in touch.